College, a Master's of Art in the Museum Studies in San Francisco State University, and an advanced graduate certificate in public policy from Northwestern. She has a strong background in projects, budget, staff management, having most recently utilized those skills while in the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, where she was the Capital Development Coordinator for the Bureau of Parks and Recreation. Before that, she worked at the Urbana Park District in Illinois, administering restorative and infrastructure projects, park revitalization, and public education programming. Until recently, she was Audubon Delta Senior Program Manager of Coastal Stewardship, working across the northern Gulf Coast to protect vulnerable coastal species and the places they live. Now she's the Director of Strategic Initiatives. Well, you've been busy, girl. So just go ahead and take it away.
That's a little bit what my life is like. Yes.
Yeah. And if you will mute everyone.
Yes, I was just looking at how to do that. I've actually never done it before.
Oh, I don't know. Dan has not.
Oh, there it is.
Okay.
All right.
Good enough.
Got it. Please, though, please feel free to raise your hand or put a question in the chat. I love being interrupted during these presentations. It means something's going right and something's got your interest. Cindy, thank you for the introduction. As you said, my name is Caitlin Lil. My new title is Director of Strategic Operations with Audubon Delta, which is the regional 3-state program, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi, of the National Audubon Society. I've been with Audubon Delta for about 2 years, or a little more than 2 years, basically since their creation. And in that time, I was the senior program manager for coastal stewardship in Louisiana and Mississippi. But with only about 3 weeks in my new job, I'm not yet sure how to make an interesting PowerPoint about strategic operations. I'm sure I'll get there, but it hasn't happened yet. So instead, we're gonna rely on what I've been working on the last 2 years with coastal stewardship. And tonight, I'm going to introduce you to some of the coastal species that we work with, some of the places we work, the outreach and education efforts that we go through. And at the very end, I'm going to make a perhaps tenuous connection to Arkansas, but I still think it's interesting, at least. So within the National Audubon Society, we have kind of these 5 strategic conservation priorities. We just updated our strategic plan. If you're a member of National, I think a lot of folks may have gotten that plan in the mail, or you can look it up online. So it's possible that this has shifted a little, but for a very long time, coasts work has been one of the major priorities for National Audubon. That includes the Great Lakes, that includes the Great Salt Lake. So it's interior coasts as well as these kind of oceanic coasts. And we focus there in large part because coasts are one of the most, they're saying that it is the most. I'm going to continue to couch it as one of the most important breeding, stopover, and wintering sites for birds in our flyway throughout the hemisphere. And I wish I had some better stories, but most recent, I think it was in the Audubon Delta newsletter recently, that we refound a bird from, I believe it was Guatemala, or it might have been El Salvador, on the Chandeleur Islands in Louisiana. And it hadn't been seen in years and nobody knew where it was, and it happened to be in the Chandeleurs. So, this work in this hemispheric work is really obvious when you're working in the coasts with some of the work that we're doing. And now here, this is just the Gulf Coast. Every one of those orange dots represents somewhere that we're doing coastal work, coastal stewardship work specifically. And so we've got it all the way from the southern tip of Texas here to the southern tips of Florida. I would say, looking at this, that there are well over 100 stewardship sites just within the Gulf of Mexico. And if you expanded this map out to include all of North America and some of the Americas, our Columbia program, and some of what we do in Central America, you would probably reach 1,000 dots. No doubt. This is one of the largest programs it's the largest program in Audubon Delta. It is one of the largest programs at National Audubon. And let's see, but specifically for Audubon Delta, so, we are divided up by a Louisiana state program and a Mississippi state program. What I always say about them is that, coastal stewardship is the same job until it really isn't. And while state borders are kind of imaginary to birds, at least, birds don't know that state borders are there. Everybody else does. And so it's different funding sources. The geography is really different. It is much harder to do work down here in Grand Isle, in Louisiana, than it is in some of our sites in Mississippi, just because, kind of no matter where you live, it takes 3 hours to get there. Some of these areas are very marshy and can only be accessed by ATV, but there's great work happening on the Louisiana side, and then also on the Mississippi side, totally different story, where you have these man-made sand beaches, and it turns out that least terns love them. So we do tons of work on the mainland over summer stewardship, and we also are doing really consistent work out on the barrier islands, doing monitoring, surveys, banding. Plovers like it out there a lot. We have oyster catcher nests, things like that. I'll go into a little more detail there, but this shows you kind of the breadth of work that in just 2 states on just the coast we're engaging in. And so the primary 4 things that we are doing in the coastal stewardship program, we work with birds during the beach nesting bird season. So when they are nesting and breeding out on the beaches. The Audubon Coastal Bird Surveys, which were born actually by Eric Johnson, who you met last time, were born from the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. That one of the things that they were able to kind of say to us is, well, you don't know how many birds were there in the first place. So how do you know how many birds died? It's an oversimplification, but in response to that, we started doing fall, winter, and spring migratory surveys so that nobody can ever tell us ever again that we don't know what's out there. Of course, it's not hitting everywhere, but it's a really important arm of the program. We do lots of outreach and education because one of the things that's unique with coastal stewardship is our intersection with the public. Almost all of the places that we work happen to be public beaches and, areas that people are boating out to. People are camping on some of these places. And so, our work relies on public education and public support. And then finally, we also are always looking at the research, at the data and the numbers. And we've had many publications come out of the Coastal Stewardship Program over the years. I'm very proud of the staff for that. So first, the beach nesting bird season runs from approximately March to August every year. And let's see. Why is it so hard to take care of a beach nesting bird? There's lots of reasons, unfortunately. As we say it, they're living on the edge. They are living on the literal edge of the United States, so close to the water. And they have a wide array of threats. Land loss, obviously. Natural predators. We're having a big problem with owls, foxes in Mississippi, coyotes in Louisiana. We just got a report of a great blue heron who may have knocked a colony out in Alabama. I didn't know a great blue heron could do that over the course of 3 or 4 nights alone, but it sure looks like they did. And I mean, I love the herons, but trade-offs. Hurricanes, storm surge, flooding. When I got here, they had not had a beach nesting bird season in Mississippi for a year. Or for 2 years, and they didn't have one the year I got there because everything was wiped out by a tropical storm in June of 21. we've been very lucky. They had a pretty good season last year. This season, we had thousands of baby least terns on the beach, and they were never interrupted. The least terns are actually leaving. They're like, I'm out of here. They nest once and they're done. If they didn't succeed the first time they nest, they'll come back and try again. Not all birds do that. Some will just leave. And so that's why it's so important for them to have an uninterrupted season. So yeah, the staff were just like so excited. Like, I haven't seen a baby bird in 3 years. Beach driving. I have some pictures of that soon, but people love beach driving. Cattle ranching on the beaches, where of course you can't expect a cow to notice where it's stepping. It's a pretty large animal. And then also, kites, off-leash dogs, fireworks. Drones have been an interesting one in recent years. I know there was a drone crash, and I think it was a royal tern colony in California a couple of years ago that wiped that. They all left. They abandoned their nests because they were too spooked by it. So there's a lot interrupting these birds. But what birds are we talking about? And let's have some adorable pictures of birds in light of the threats. Adorable pictures of birds. Here's the 9-year-old. Sorry, she wants to see the adorable pictures of birds too. Pardon me. Let me talk. So the least tern obviously is our primary animal in both Louisiana and Mississippi. Mississippi has the largest least tern colonies anywhere in the Gulf Coast. I think we have 40% of the population of Gulf Coast least terns. So, it's a big place for it. Wilson's plovers. And now you probably haven't had much of a chance to see these in Arkansas. They're one of the biggest plovers, not as big as a black-bellied or golden-winged plover, not winged, you know what I mean. But they're noticeably bigger. They have a big honking bill, and they love to make themselves known. They love to follow you around and peep at you. And they have this funny little run where they flatten themselves out, and it's like pancaking. And so I've become very fond of these birds. You're a Wilson's plover. Okay. And then common nighthawk in Louisiana, kind of a surprising beach nesting birder, but it is precipitously in decline across the United States. And so we can kind of take advantage of the work that we're doing with least terns and Wilson's plovers and these other species and help the common nighthawk as well. But you can see here just how camouflaged these eggs are. It would be so hard to pick, these nighthawk eggs out of the ground. And, most of the time they're in a little depression, so they're like kind of dug in. And the babies themselves, of course, are very camouflaged, adorably camouflaged. Let's see. So just a little bit more information about, kind of some of our focal birds. Least terns are colonial nesters. So, I think that we had 3,000 adult least terns on the ground at Beauvoir Beach in outside of Biloxi. So big colonies, but also we can see them in like groups of 10 or 15 in some other places. They are very vocal. They feed from open water nearby, and they prefer open beachfronts and barrier islands. They actually, if there is too much if there's too much vegetation out on the ground for them, they'll leave. They won't nest there. So we're actually looking in Mississippi at reducing vegetation so that they can have more access to just plain sand with shell and the blistering sun on them. Not how I would prefer to raise a baby, but I can't blame them. If this is what they want, this is what they want. Again, Wilson's plovers, they are solitary nesters. You can get a better glimpse of that really big bill there. And here you can see this is T7. So banding is a really big part of what we do. They can be secretive, but often vocal. And they prefer vegetated dunes with adjacent marsh and exposed mudflats. Black skimmers, my favorite. They let me hold black skimmers while they were being banded earlier this year. These can be seen year round in Mississippi and Louisiana. They like to be, they actually do more colonial gathering in the winter where, you can see flocks of hundreds of them just, it's called loafing on the beach, where they all just kind of stand in a big group. They forage by skimming. They are the only species of bird in the entire world with a longer lower mandible than upper. That's not, mandible's not right, but lower beak. And they nest along with the more aggressive least terns, and that helps protect them. So, if a couple of black skimmers join a least tern colony, they're probably going to do pretty well because the least terns are going to take care of the problems going on around them. Snowy plovers, a little less common, but becoming more so. They're primarily island nesters in Mississippi, but we did have our very first successful fledging of snowy plovers in Louisiana last summer, known in Louisiana last summer. And I think that's in like 70 years or something like that. It's been a really long time. So that was very exciting for our staff to find. Common nighthawk, again, they are a solitary nester. Males display in the air with wing booms, and they prefer the backshore beaches. So they're not right up against the water. They're more in the transitional areas that become marshy for their nesting and foraging. And, one of the things that we're doing out there, that our staff are doing, is monitoring the nests to investigate what the major threats are, as well as how they're responding to large-scale restoration projects, and even some small-scale restoration projects. Like in Mississippi, we just added this like ground-up shell here. There's a couple of terms for it, but we've been saying shell hash. We added plots of this, and no scientific analysis, no statistics back on it yet. But anecdotally, the staff really felt like the least terns were attracted to the plots with the shell hash as opposed to the rest. And that's a very small thing to experiment on, and that could make a very big difference for the survival of least terns. Nest success always varies from year to year, and can be heavily impacted by human disturbances and severe storms. Some of the ways that we protect these birds every year, though, are that we add what we call symbolic fencing out to the beaches. That's signs, posts, and rope. And we call it symbolic because, let's be honest, very few people are necessarily going to stop and just completely not walk through an area with just like a little thin yellow rope. We could put up the best fencing in the world, and someone would probably find a way into it. In this case, it's, not even at the point of what garden fencing might be. And so symbolic is really the best term for the effort that we're putting in. And there we go. We have lots and lots of staff. We try to give them the best tools that we can when they're posting colonies 3 miles long. Sometimes that's a wagon. Sometimes that's just their feet. Sometimes it's an ATV or a truck that can drive down the beach if it's safe to do so. But, this is a really physical manual labor job a lot of the time. And, why install this fencing? Why try to stop people going through? Because these birds are so camouflaged. Look at these teeny tiny babies. There's its face buried in the grass. And there's this one you can see just a little bit better, but that is so easy to step on or to drive past if you don't know. For example, here's some nests with tire marks right up against them. I mean, this one is 2 inches away easily. And this can be people who are driving ATVs on the beach for recreation. It can be people who are just driving to their campsite down the road. We have an increasing number of people who are doing Jeep on the beach events. And if you drive a Jeep, I don't mean any offense, I promise. But it's been something for us to respond to. How do you respond to 100 vehicles are on the beach right now? And it turns out traffic cones and flags and giving people presents tends to be a pretty good way. We actually had a wonderful time in both states with the Jeep groups, they were extremely respectful once they knew that they were out there. And then one of the other methods is people. You put people on the beach. Bird stewards give birds a voice. And so, we use the symbolic fencing, and we also put up, a person, usually with like a tent and some educational information, maybe a table with some activities. And it gives us a chance to educate the public about what birds are out there, but also a person who can literally go interpose themselves if human disturbance is happening. So they will go out and they will talk to someone who may have stepped inside a colony and either didn't notice it or didn't care. They will make a record of how much human disturbance is happening that they couldn't necessarily interrupt. There's joggers who go by, and joggers might go by a little too close, and the entire colony will flush and fly up into the sky, and that leaves their eggs and their chicks exposed to the sun. It's just a jogger. Jogger's not really doing anything wrong, right? But we have that data about, how many times and in what ways are the birds being disturbed. So if it was, if we found out later, lots of joggers have been disrupting the birds and there's been so many flushes, well, how can we adjust for that? Do we need to put traffic cones out so people can run in a different place? Do we need to have a marketing campaign that's reaching out to runners? Not far-fetched, but that's the sort of thing that we learn from the data that's being collected out on the beaches. So that was a brief overview of that. The next thing that I said that we do is these Audubon coastal bird surveys. They're usually then August to May. There's a little overlap with the breeding season in spring. But for these, we're monitoring and estimating populations of winter and migratory birds. And this is across the entire northern Gulf Coast. Again, Texas is doing this. There's good data coming out of Alabama right now. You count all birds that you see along a 1 mile walk transect in a range of a 1/4 mile around you. So 1/8 of a mile to your right and 1/8 of a mile to your left. You're going to start at one point and you're just going to start walking. I've done several of these. The kiddo was telling people earlier that she had done one. They are challenging. Your ID skills need to be up there. I learned my winter plovers very fast. I learned my winter terns less fast. I still would have trouble. Even when I was kind of at my best point with that. It's hard. It's a hard thing to ask people to do. And a lot of it is done by staff, but a lot of it is also done by volunteers. We have a really dedicated volunteer pool who go out on these walks. And these walks happen in these 3 pulses: fall, winter, and spring. There are 6 surveys that take place in the fall, 3 in the winter, and 6 in the spring. And they take place about 10 days apart. So you need to go out every 10 days to the same site and walk it 6 times over the course of the fall. Again, a little bit to ask people to do there. But I thought it was just one of the most satisfying things I've done, especially when you do find things like a banded bird. This is one of the only ways to get a recite on a banded bird. People need to be out there to see them. If they're not tags that are attached to Motus towers or the cell towers, and we're going to talk about that a little more at the end, people need to see banded birds to be able to report them. So this is one of the ways that we do that. And also then recording, what are the environmental conditions? Is there a lot of wind? Is there a lot of trash on the beach? Is there a lot of rack? Is the rack line high this year? So, all of this feeds into us having pretty exceptional data over 10 years across the entire Gulf Coast about winter and migratory populations. And here you can see, obviously ATVs have been going through, but there's our staff out in probably the cold and the wind, walking their mile down. And then of course you've got to walk the mile back. You only count birds on one way though, because you don't want to, even if it's a new bird, you can't count it because we want to have integrity in the data, no double counts. So this is just an example of some of the data collection. All data is submitted through eBird. There is an Audubon Coastal Bird Survey protocol that then pops up all of the things that we study in eBird, which is really cool. And some of the birds that we're looking at are sanderlings, which has a bill shorter than Dunlin, white gray plumage, and it's more of a wave runner, right? We know sanderlings get right down there to the water and then pop back up when the water's coming in. Least sandpipers are another common bird, as well as western sandpipers. So if you're looking at a mixed flock of teeny tiny little birds, what you're really looking for is that short, thin bill and greenish yellow legs. This is brown black legs. And these guys have a slightly warmer brown tones. Willets are common, and actually once you get to, April and May ACBS, they've already started breeding. They've established nesting territories. So oftentimes if you're doing an ACBS tour in that time period, they are like flying around you, peeping at you, and they're not the smallest birds. But they have that unique black and white banded wing pattern when they're flying. Our dear little piping plovers love to winter in both Louisiana and Mississippi. They have a pale breastband, a plain face, often all black bill, and those beautiful orange legs. And, by the end of the time that I was doing these ACBS surveys, I could look at a plover and know what it was, which one it was. Was it a piping, a semi-palm, a Wilson's? Black-bellied's a little different. A snowy. Was it one of those four, just by its behavior? They do behave slightly differently. Some of them stand up just a little bit more. Some of them are always kind of bobbing along the beach. So you do get familiar with it with more experience. Juvenile black skimmers. This is a really fun project. We've been doing it for years in Mississippi, that we count not just the birds for the black skimmers, but how many adults versus how many immatures versus how many juveniles. And you can tell the difference over the course of the year. The juveniles have this really weird, muted bill color, brown and white mottling on their back and their wings, and they have an incomplete cap on their head. And this really helps us with seeing, survival rates from a particular year. They don't always nest on the mainland. We don't see where all the black skimmers nest, and you have this chance to really get an idea of, a couple months later, how many of them have survived. And then when you're doing this again in April and May, and you have immatures, how many of them have survived almost through their first year? And it's great to know that. And if you do it year after year, you can come up with trends for it. Immature brown pelicans, even though pelicans are not one of our big species. Seaweed, good question. I have not known seaweed to be too big of a problem. But I know that we did have an issue in Louisiana a couple of years ago, last summer, I think, where they had started doing some beach raking that, frankly, they really needed a permit to be doing, because sargassum had washed up on the shore. And this was a place where they wanted people to be out swimming and camping and spending a week at a time hanging out. And if there's sargassum all over the shore, nobody wants to do that. So there have been concerns, but it hasn't interrupted our seasons yet in these 3 summers that I've been here. But that is a great question, because they certainly deal with that more in Florida a lot of the time. Let's see. So yeah, immature brown pelicans. What else we got? Royal terns. This is an adult non-breeding royal tern. They're lovely out on the beaches. They've got those big orange bills. Their caps are gone, but they've still got like really puffy backs of the heads. And this is where I start to lose my ability to tell the terns apart. But as it says, the back is a uniform gray color as opposed to any modeling, and the wing coverts are going to be uniform. Adult non-breeding laughing gulls, white neck and breast, pale tips on the primaries. Here we go. Here's our little pale tips. There are a lot of gulls out there too. And so telling the difference between a laughing gull, a Bonaparte's gull, I had some lesser blackback gulls. We had herring gulls, a couple of ringbills, not as many. And then with the terns mixed in, these big mixed flocks can be very difficult.
No, I have I'm on mute.
But it was actually
right now. I'm on mute.
Oh, not on Bill, unfortunately, not on mute, which is okay. There you go. Now you are. But so these big mixed flocks are so hard to tell the difference between things. And Eric Johnson really strongly gave me some good advice when I was getting frustrated with it. And he was like, it's great to find a rare bird. It's always fun. It is much more important to tell the normal birds. So if you don't find that one Bonaparte's gull that's mixed in with all the laughing gulls, we're going to survive. But if you can tell me that there's probably 75 laughing gulls out there and there were 200 of them last year, that's the real information that is going to be the most valuable to everybody when we're doing this. It really changed my thinking on how and why we do the Audubon coastal bird surveys. Our third kind of pillar here is outreach and education. That is a year-round effort for a lot of reasons. We get to have a little more fun here. We've been a little doomy and gloomy on some of the rest of this, but we get to have fun with outreach and education. Like these kiddos get to make signs every year. We request in Mississippi kid signs for the Least Terns, and they are just so sweet. Hold on just a sorry about that. Then the kids get to come out and see it, and they get certificates and things like that. It's a really special experience for them. We partner with a local high school in Mississippi. We don't do this as much in Louisiana, but in Mississippi, they make chick shelters because, again, shade is not common out on these beaches. And as it does get hotter and the beaches have less of the composition that the Least Terns might be looking for usually, it's very easy for chicks to overheat and die. And the chick shelters at least give them a little bit of a chance. It gives them a choice, right? I have chickens. This is always what I say about it. Even if they're not using the fan that I gave them, they have a choice to be in front of the fan. And that choice is more important than not having it, of course. We engaged local communities to do things like beach cleanups, and this one was native planting that we were doing at the Least Tern important bird area outside of Gulfport, Mississippi. And this was just such a great event. But again, this is where my regional coastal biologist Abby Dara is like, no more plants. The birds are gonna leave if we put more plants out. So we're working on putting together a volunteer group that's gonna help us thin the plants back every year so that they don't take over too much. Holiday weekends are the busiest times for the coastal stewardship team, possibly the busiest times for the entire Audubon Delta team in the entire year. Memorial Day and 4th of July, especially when people are blowing off fireworks on the beach right in the middle of nesting season, are very, very hard. But actually, both states reported to me that this year was better than any previous year on record, just in terms of how much human disturbance. There was less human disturbance. There was less fireworks being shot off. More people, they felt like, came up and talked to them positively about, hey, thanks for being here. Thanks for protecting the birds. How are they doing this year? And so that's really a testament to years of community outreach to get people there. We all know how much people love their fireworks. But it's a hard thing to deal with. People want to use the beach too. And we're not trying to tell them that they shouldn't. Maybe they should do it in some different places and some different days if we could encourage that. We also attend other people's outreach events. So we'll take tents and tables out and talk to folks. We went to the Biloxi Pride Festival this last year. We went to a river jamboree in Moss Point. We went to the Holly Beach Crab Fest in Louisiana. And for the Crab Fest this year, what we had made were beer koozies with Black Skimmers on them. And so people were walking around with their beer koozies with Audubon Delta and coastal birds. And, you know, I kind of love that at the end of the day. And they really liked them too. They were flying off the table. Policy and advocacy is a important branch that doesn't get enough attention. This is our Louisiana Stewardship Manager, Katie Barnes, at the U.S. Capitol advocating for seabirds. They were doing a seabird fly-in to the Capitol, and some of us met virtually with state and national legislators, and some people went to the Capitol and had some great conversations with folks. So, you know, this sort of work can range from, you know, we need an ordinance, a local ordinance on a beach that dogs need to be leashed. Right? That can be a really influential thing, but it can go all the way up to, you know, we really believe that the red knot and its habitat ought to stay on the endangered species list. And so we got to go talk to some senators and some legislators up in DC. And then lastly here, the Share the Shore campaign is so sweet. This was put together by the National Audubon Society, and it's resources that any of us working in coastal stewardship can use. And so they made all these graphics. We put Share the Shore stuff on everything now because it's so bright and colorful, and it builds a brand that people then can recognize across the country. And it lets us do social media. There's blog posts, there's been webinars. There's these, they do it in Spanish and English, which is great. And I think they have plans to expand it to other languages. But, you know, give birds 100 feet of space, you know, that can get posted over and over the summer. There's something where a plover is in an ice cream cone. I'm not totally sure what's happening with that one, I'll be honest. But that there are these cute graphics that are really eye-catching. And then the last thing that I said that, you know, we're really looking at research and publication. Coastal stewardship is traditionally thought of as having two arms: the stewardship side, which handles like beach nesting birds and patrolling and putting up the signage and doing the outreach and the education. And then the science and monitoring side, which is doing counts of how many least terns are there. They're going out to the barrier islands. They're running the ACBS tours, stuff like that. Really, I strongly believe that these two things go hand in hand. You can't have effective stewardship techniques without science and monitoring, because if you don't know what the least terns are responding to, how do you know what stewardship techniques to employ? So it all works in concert together. There it is. We already wrote it. I was ahead of myself. Monitoring informs effective stewardship. And, you know, this can really reduce human-caused nest losses. Exactly kind of the jogger example I gave before. If we found out that so many birds were being influenced by joggers coming too close, that informs what we need to do as stewards. There's species-specific responses to restoration, like the least terns and the shells. Predator pressures, like I said earlier, we've got, you know, the owls and the foxes and the coyotes, and then just understanding what's happening between these birds, breeding dynamics, adult survival through banding, stuff like that. We publish. We share our knowledge, the knowledge that we have gained in Louisiana and Mississippi, with the broader scientific community. You know, this was published in Conservation Biology. That's a pretty big one. Abby Dara, I mentioned her earlier. She's our coastal biologist. You know, she found, I know, mixed evidence. Doesn't sound great, But mixed evidence is better than no evidence for effects of stewardship on Least Terns success. So she documented that the presence of stewardship techniques helps with nesting success in coastal Mississippi. And then the larger national science team for Audubon published something on again, effective stewardship techniques in these protected areas. I've kind of already described this, but nest success varying from year to year, but we actually have to run that data against itself. So right now we are very close to the end of the nesting season. We had 4 meetings this week about how to close out the season and start prepping data for analysis and then writing of reports. So we're right in that part of the cycle right now. So some of the things that we learn, this is just an example that from 2016 to 2020, this was in Louisiana, over the course of 5 years, nest failure due to predation was 35% coyotes, 30% ghost crabs, 32% an unknown predator, 2% ants, and 1% avian. So if you're looking at this, what actions are you going to take finding this information out? Well, I'm going to go call U.S. Fish and Wildlife about whether or not they have any plans to reduce the coyote population in the area or relocate the coyotes in the area. I don't personally know what you do about ghost crabs. That one's a little more challenging. But there must be ways of responding to that we could take. So that's really important information to have. And like I said, bird banding, this always gets kind of shoved at the end of the presentations. And Eric gives a great presentation on like ethics in bird banding alone, because it is such a big topic. Of course, there's some ethical implications when you are catching and handling wild birds, especially ones that we're protecting. But field readable bands can be used to track habitat use, pair densities. It lets you relocate within the year and see, oh, okay, I know that this pair is over here and this pair is over here and this pair is over here, and I've identified them because they're banded. And so you can keep track of the birds throughout the year, and then you can see how many of them come back, right? Annual site fidelity is kind of amazing. Katie has been tracking the same Wilson's plover for 8 years, always coming back to the same beach that she banded 8 years ago in Louisiana. And what a cool thing to be able to say that and then you do also find out, sometimes if they've been seen, where did they go? So we're finding Wilson's plovers and snowy plovers on the Pacific coast of Central America. They're in Colombia. They're flying all this way and then flying back to us. And that is such an incredible story to be able to tell, and just such a feat of nature that these species do this. So in my opinion, banding birds is a great way of learning about them if you are doing it right. And it's also can be a great way of celebrating them. So connections to Arkansas. I promised that I would try to include this in this presentation. And I'm going to warn you that when I told Abby and Melinda, our stewardship managers in Mississippi earlier, what I plan to do here, they both just kind of looked at me and said, okay, Caitlin, sure. So take all of this with a grain of salt, but I think there's some valid points here. So the coasts are not the only place with least terns. I imagine some of you have seen the inland population of least terns in the United States. You've got these 2-3 big lines that kind of overlap with mostly the boundaries of Arkansas, but there they are. And these terns only came off the endangered species list in 2021. So it's only been 2 years. Their population has recovered quite a lot. My understanding is in the 80s, they were down to like 2,000 birds. Now there's 18,000 birds. That's a good jump. I understand them calling it stable. but any species that has been that vulnerable before could become vulnerable again. And you never know, you know, they could be doing great in the Dakotas, but for some reason falter in Arkansas. And then we need to start paying more attention to them. And the knowledge that we have of these birds from the coasts can help inform how to take care of interior least terns. And there is some evidence, very little evidence, but there is a little bit of evidence that least terns that fledged off the coast of Texas moved to inland least tern populations. And I'm sure there's some studies on this. I'm sure it doesn't happen very often, but the fact that it can happen at all is kind of interesting. And the really interesting thing I think about this is the increasing impact of things like the MODIS network, where we're getting pings of birds. This is an outdated map because there is one MODIS tower in Arkansas, still just the one. It's the one at the Little Rock Audubon Center. And it's not going to be picking up any least terns anytime soon. I know that. But we've had two nice pings on it, a golden winged warbler and a Swainson's thrush, I believe. The MODIS towers are really only as good as we're using them. You need more of them out there to be catching birds, and you need more birds banded, right? And so that's actually why I wanted to mention this at the end here, is because Mississippi just got a grant, oil spill money. It's really oil spill money, but a grant through the Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality to install MODIS towers. You'll see they don't exist down here right now. Maybe one or two have been added in the meantime, but install MODIS towers on coastal Mississippi and start throwing tags on least terns and really start looking at, you know, where are these terns going? We're looking at a more internal study of like, where do they move along the coast? Where do they go in the winter? And then where are they foraging? So we're going to put MODIS towers not just on the mainland, but on barrier islands as well, so that there's this kind of concentration of places that they can be pinging off of. We're also going to be adding the cell tower tags to Black Skimmers, which I think is really cool, because for that you can find out like entire routes that they've traveled. And we know that those birds are going back and forth between the states. We are consistently every year, through finding banded birds on ACBS surveys, every year we're finding, oh, this one came from Florida. Oh, our bird is in Texas this year, and on and on and on. And we want to know more about that, because that is going to help inform these larger habitat and regional explorations. And, you know, we get places like MDEQ coming to us saying, well, what should we be doing? And this is part of how we get answers to that question of how to save some of these coastal birds. So that is my very tenuous connection to Arkansas, is that you do also have least terns. And as our ability to research birds across a large geographic area grows, you never know. Someday I'm going to come back to this group and be like, our Mississippi least tern is in Arkansas. And how cool would that be? So thank you so much, everybody. That was my presentation on Audubon Delta's Coastal Stewardship Program, an introduction to what we do. It is a complicated, multifaceted piece of work, like I said, that includes science and publication and outreach and human disturbance and banding, little bit of everything. So I hope you enjoyed learning about that. Please, if you have any questions, I will stick around for a while.
Caitlin, we talked about the seaweed, the storms that come, if you're going to put the MODIS towers on the shoreline, or is that going, you have a strong hurricane come in, will that tear those up?
It could.
It could.
Yeah. I am not our MODIS expert, but I know that they'll be looking at how to do that. I think that for some of them, it's more about having a fast way to take them down ahead of a storm. Usually hurricanes don't surprise you overnight, right? Usually their strength
Yeah.
can pick up, and that's bad.
Right.
But you usually have a couple days warning, and our ability to go take them down
Good.
I think would be more important. But you know, I was just hearing from
Okay.
Eric and Abby that like there's more and more places that are just hooking these up to car batteries in remote places. So sometimes you do have to accept that you can't make smaller pieces of infrastructure hurricane proof.
Yeah.
So we have money to replace them. That's always a smart idea anyway. You never know what'll happen. But I think that's the basic answer.
Good.
Caitlin, I have two questions for you. First of all, you didn't mention, and I'm not sure why, your relationship to the oil and gas industry. Hopefully they are a billfold. And secondly, I wondered, with the rise of sea levels, what modeling have you done for reduction of this environment, not very indirectly through human, but really the birds are going to be the ones that get hit by this when the shore goes away?
Nope, those are two great questions. I won't shy away from them, I promise. Oil and gas is challenging at best, I'll put it that way. I don't mind taking Deepwater Horizon money. That's money they owe back to all of us for the damages that they did, right? So while yes, that's oil and gas money, that's not like them putting in a donation, that's them doing restoration for having damaged things so badly. That being said, absolutely, the Pascagoula River Audubon Center has donations from Chevron, the local Chevron company.
This is good.
And we're having such a hard time in Louisiana right now because the LNG plant, one part of them is being so nice to us and helping us and like donating money and getting experts down on the ground. And like a couple years ago, we're having meetings with us like, should we buy this piece of land where black rails might be and protect it for you? And like, that's great. I love those conversations. And on the other hand, they're trying to build a new plant in a place that may destroy black rail habitat. And those two things aren't actually connected. They're just like two different sides of this company doing different things. I know that Eric is really torn up a lot of the time. I will add, even though I have not been asked about it, offshore wind is a thing we get asked about quite a lot. And do we support it or not? And we are more than tentative supporters. We are supporters of the offshore wind movement. Yes, it has the potential to seriously disrupt migrating populations of birds across the Gulf Coast. But there are some solutions to that, like turning them off overnight when these, or we know when some of these big pushes are happening. We know in advance when the birds are coming because of other technology now. So, can we turn them off then? But the thing that we don't always think about is, damages from gas and oil are kind of a hidden thing off to the side that we don't see the impacts of every day. And so over focusing on, oh, but the birds get hit by the thing when like there's no air pollution taking place. There's always, it's shades of gray all the way down. And we are always just trying to make the best choice that we can. I know what my personal opinions are. My personal opinions are not that of the National Audubon Society. But I also completely trust our policy experts to be making informed decisions about what to advocate for. I don't know if that answers the question you were asking, John.
And the second one was the seashore going away.
Yeah, so there's a couple different things there. We are doing elevation studies where we go capture, at what we'll do the elevations over the course of the summer, and we'll capture how high up were the successful nests. This year we really didn't have any storm surge, so for all I know, they're right at sea level. In past years we have had some, and maybe only the nests that were 8 inches up survived. So, you know, we have some of that data now, and we'll continue to take that data. We have places where we have advocated for dune buildup. A lot of the time you don't need it to be super high, but you need something to not wash everything away. We're trying to restore the least tern important bird areas in Mississippi, and that would include allowing for dune and vegetation buildup to happen, so that, again, you know, they might be a little more resistant against storm surge. We can't protect them against every hurricane, but there are a couple of these things that we can do. We have our eyes on it. Again, I am not our expert on this particular topic, but I know some of the directions that we are going in with it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Caitlin, I have one other question. What owls are busy picking off your birds on the beach?
It's great.
Yes.
It's great horns.
Really?
It's great horns. Yeah.
Oh,
You get on the beach and you can see the imprints of their wings where
Really?
they've landed, just because of the way that they work. Great horns tend to be that. I know that we had some short-eared in the marshy areas of Louisiana this last year, but I don't think we ever had any evidence of on a game camera of that short-eared owl is eating that Least Tern chick. It tends to be great horns.
Well,
But Caitlin, for the size of a great horn, surely the chicks are not even an hors d'oeuvre.
I don't know. They like mice. I can only imagine that they're. I mean, I wonder this too, right? How does such a large bird? I mean, you know, great gray owls are out there eating enormous voles and you know, hucking them down, but you know, great horns go for smaller prey, and especially if that prey can't fly, can't dig, can't hide, can't do anything else. Oh, and yeah, that's a really good point from Rosalie. Thank you. That, you know, taking chicks to feed their young, because it's potentially a more appropriate size for a baby great horned owl.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, I could see how just a couple of Least Tern chicks are a really good snack if you're a great horned owl. Wish they weren't, but.
Thank you.
any other questions for Caitlin tonight? Well, they're being very quiet tonight, Caitlin.
Oh,
We really appreciate you coming by and talking to us about your programs down there. We don't hear much about the coasts up here in Arkansas, so this was some good education about what y'all are doing, and it sounds like you're making a difference. Sometimes, you know, it takes a while sometimes to bring people around. So thank you so much for taking your time. And your daughter was great. My
yes.
cats were worse than your daughter.
Yeah, she's unfortunately, she's been watching me do this basically her entire life, so she's used to it. But thank you for your patience with having a small child. And really, it was a pleasure coming and talking. She's handing me her anteater. Okay, now there's an anteater. We went to the zoo on Monday. There were peacocks. Yes, I told them about the peacocks. Anyway, again, thank you so much. It was really a pleasure to come talk to you tonight. And I know that in my new role, I hopefully will be coming and talking to you more often, or at least coming up to Little Rock and some other areas of Arkansas, and getting more directly involved in the work that Dan and John Young are doing. And Uta is one of my direct reports now, so the centers are under my purview. And then, like I said, at some point I'll figure out a way to make budgets and HR stuff look really interesting to other people, and maybe you'll
Good
hear
luck.
from me again.
I love it.
Well, thanks so much. And
Thank you. I'm gonna stay on the call. Cindy, I think I made you the co-host, but I'm gonna stay on the call. I'm gonna stop the recording
yeah,
and just kind of be here in the background to make sure that nothing shuts
Okay.
down on y'all. So,
okay. Yeah, Dan never lets me do
yeah.
any of that. So,
all right.
Okay.
Thanks again.
all right.
Thank you.
Well, let me get my computer filed up here and well, maybe